Hello, welcome to the information session for potential applicants to the competition for the personal preparation of special education, early intervention, and related services personnel. This competition falls under the Personnel Development Program, which is a discretionary grant program managed by the Office of Special Education Programs. This information session will provide you with information about applying for this grant opportunity that was posted on Grants.gov website on May 13th, 2026. My name is Sanyong An, Competition Manager for the 3 to 5K grant, and today I will provide interested applicants with information regarding this grant competition. The assistant listing number is 84.325K. A few important points. The purpose of this presentation is to offer guidance, and it covers only a general overview of what's in the application notice and instructions. Because of this, all applicants should make sure to read the full notice, application instructions, and any other relevant materials thoroughly. Additionally, it is recommended that applicants watch the Applying for Office of Special Education Programs Discretionary Grants webinar to get a broader understanding of how to submit an application. Please be aware of application timelines. The application notice and instructions was published on Grants.gov on May 13th, 2026. All applications are due on July 2nd, 2026. No later than 11:59 and 59 seconds p.m. Note that this is Eastern Time, and applicants should determine the corresponding time in your time zone. I will discuss the implications of a late submission later in this session. The application notice and instructions published on Grants.gov contains the most comprehensive information on how to apply. The instructions include important information about the submission procedures using the Grants.gov system. In the following section, I will go over important information, including the purposes of the priority and eligible applicants. I will also discuss the funding level for the 84.325K competition. The purposes of the personnel preparation of special education, early intervention, and related services personnel are to 1. Help address state-identified shortages and needs for personnel preparation in special education and early intervention, including infants and toddlers and youth with disabilities. And 2. Ensure that those personnel have the necessary skills and knowledge derived from practices that have been determined through scientifically based research to be successful in serving those children. The absolute priority of the 3 to 5K grant is personnel preparation of special education, early intervention, and related services personnel. Please note that there is no interdisciplinary requirement for this year's competition. However, applicants are allowed to propose an interdisciplinary project if they wish to. The purpose of this priority is to prepare and increase the number of personnel who have the necessary qualifications to serve children with disabilities. The priority will fund projects that use evidence-based strategies to prepare scholars in special education, early intervention, and related services at the bachelor's degree, certification, master's degree, educational specialist degree, or clinical doctoral degrees levels to serve in a variety of settings, including natural environments, the home and community settings in which children and children with and without disabilities participate, early learning programs, childcare, classrooms, and schools. There are two competitive preference priorities in this year's competition. The first competitive priority is given to applications from historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and tribally controlled colleges and universities, TCCUs. Applicants that meet this competitive priority will be given 5 points. OSEP will also give 5 additional points to applicants that have not had an active 3 to 5M. OSEP will also give 5 additional points to applicants that have not had an active 3 to 5K, 3 to 5M, or 3 to 5R grant in the last 5 years. Please note that applicants are institutions of higher education, not a department or a program within an institution. Also, a grant is considered active until the end of the grant funding period, including any extension period. Eligible applicants are IHEs and private nonprofit organizations. Eligible applicants must have a bachelor's degree, certification, master's degree, educational specialist degree, or a clinical doctoral degree program that prepares scholars in special education, early intervention, and related services, or be a private nonprofit organization that has the legal authority to enter into grants and cooperative agreements with the federal government on behalf of an applicant that has a bachelor's degree, certification, master's degree, educational specialist degree, or a clinical doctoral degree program that prepares scholars in special education, early intervention, and related services. It is important to note that eligible applicants may submit only one application under this year's 84.325K competition. As previously noted, applicants are institutions of higher education, not a department, program, or a faculty member within an institution. Therefore, each institution must decide which single application they want to submit for this competition and indicate the specific focus area of the application on the application cover sheet and the abstract template. We have $8,750,000 available for the 3 to 5K competition this year, and this can fund up to 35 awards. Each award will not exceed $1,250,000 for a total project period of 60 months. A maximum award for a single budget period is no more than $350,000. An estimated range of awards is $100,000 to $350,000 per year. This program uses a training indirect cost rate of 8%. Applicants may allocate up to the initial 12 months of the project period and a maximum of $100,000 from the first budget cycle for planning purposes. Beyond this planning allocation, additional federal funds may be directed toward scholar support and other grant-related activities during year one, provided that the overall funding request for the first 12 months period does not exceed the maximum award amount of $350,000. Throughout the duration of the project, no less than 70% of awarded funds must be designed for scholar support. Please note, the minimum scholar support requirement has increased to 70% for the current competition, compared to 65% in previous years. In this section, I will introduce important terms defined for the purposes of the 3 to 5K priority. For the purposes of this priority, related services include the following: speech-language pathology and audiology services, assistive technology services, interpreting services, intervener services, psychological services, applied behavior analysis, physical therapy and occupational therapy services, recreation, including therapeutic recreation services, social work services, counseling services, including rehabilitation counseling, and orientation and mobility services. And for the purposes of this priority, evidence-based means, at a minimum, evidence that demonstrates a rationale where a key project component included in the project's logic model is informed by research or evaluation findings that suggest the project component is likely to improve relevant outcomes. For the purposes of this priority, scholar means an individual who, A, is pursuing a bachelor's certification, master's, educational specialist degree, or clinical doctoral degree in special education, early intervention, or related services. B, an individual who receives scholarship assistance as authorized under Section 662 of IDEA. C, an individual who will be eligible for a license, endorsement, or certification from a state or national credentialing authority following completion of the degree program identified in the application. And D, an individual who will be able to be employed in a position that serves children with disabilities for a minimum of 51% of their time or caseload. And individuals pursuing degrees in general education or early childhood education do not qualify as scholars eligible for scholarship assistance. For the purposes of this priority, certification refers to programs of study for individuals with bachelor's, master's, educational specialist, or clinical doctoral degrees that lead to licensure, endorsement, or certification from a state or national credentialing authority following completion of the degree program that qualifies graduates to teach or provide services to children with disabilities. Programs of study that lead to a certification of completion awarded from the institution of higher education, but do not lead to licensure, endorsement, or certification from a state or national credentialing authority do not qualify. In this section, beginning on slide 18, I will review application information, including focus areas, application narrative and selection criteria, and requirements. In this competition, focus area A is preparing personnel to serve infants, toddlers, and preschool-age children with disabilities and their families. And focus area B is preparing personnel to serve school-age children with disabilities. Each focus area constitutes a separate funding category. The Secretary intends to award grants under each of these funding categories, provided that applications submitted are of sufficient quality. Applicants must identify the specific focus area under which they are applying as part of the competition title on the application cover sheet, SF 424, line 12, and the application abstract template. The application notice and instructions lays out how the application narrative should be divided into 5 sections. These section headings are identical to the 5 categories of the selection criteria used by reviewers to evaluate each application. I will go over the narrative sections and selection criteria and point out what should be addressed in each section of the narrative and how reviewers will consider each of the selection criteria. Slide 22 discusses the project's significance. The narrative section on significance should demonstrate how, 1, the proposed project addresses state or tribal shortages of personnel who are fully qualified to serve children with disabilities, ages birth through 21, to improve outcomes for children with disabilities, including literacy and math outcomes. 2, the proposed project will increase the number of personnel with competencies in the proposed preparation focus area to provide effective evidence-based instruction, interventions, and services, including through distance education that improve outcomes for children with disabilities, including literacy and mathematics outcomes, and their families, including expectant parents of infants with disabilities. And 3, the applicant has successfully graduated students from its program. To address this requirement, including data, if available, on the number of students who have graduated in the last 5 years and the number of those working in the field. Reviewers will score the significance section between 0 and 10 points. In determining the significance of the proposed project, the Secretary considers the following criteria: the data presented, including a comparison to local, state, regional, national, or international data that demonstrates the issue, challenge, or opportunity to be addressed by the proposed project. The importance or magnitude of the results or outcomes likely to be attained by the proposed project, especially contributions toward improving teaching practice and student learning and achievement. Slide 23 relates to the quality of the project design. This section of the narrative should demonstrate how the project will conduct its planning activities if the application elects to use up to a portion of the first budget period for planning, and how the project will recruit and retain scholars. To meet this requirement, the applicant must describe 1, the selection criteria the project will use to identify applicants for admission in the program. 2, the specific recruitment strategies the project will use to attract applicants, including applicants with disabilities. And please note that the recruitment strategies and selection criteria the applicant intends to use must ensure equal access and treatment of all applicants seeking admission to the program and must be consistent with applicable law, including federal civil rights law. Applicants should also describe in this section 3, the approach that will be used to mentor and support all scholars for retention and completion of the program within 60 months of the project start date, and preparing them for careers in special education, early intervention, and related services, and how the project will promote the acquisition of competencies needed by special education, early intervention, or related services personnel in the project's proposed preparation focus area to provide effective evidence-based interventions and services that improve outcomes for children with disabilities, including literacy and mathematics outcomes, and their families, including expectant parents of infants with disabilities. To address this requirement, the applicants must 1, describe how the proposed components, such as coursework, field or clinical experiences in early intervention, early childhood or school settings, work-based experiences, or other opportunities provided to scholars, and sequence of the components will enable the scholars to acquire the competencies needed by applicable personnel to serve children with disabilities in a school or children and their families, including expectant parents of infants with disabilities in an early intervention setting. 2, describe how the proposed project will reflect current evidence-based approaches, practices in personnel preparation to prepare scholars to provide effective evidence-based instruction, interventions, and services that improve outcomes for children with disabilities, including literacy and mathematics outcomes, and their families, including expectant parents of infants with disabilities in a variety of early childhood and early intervention settings or educational settings. And describe the pedagogical practices that will be used to ensure that scholars are prepared to create supportive learning environments for children with disabilities, and describe how the project will engage state or tribal agencies, parents, including parents with disabilities, local agencies, schools or programs, and youth with disabilities to inform and support project components. When evaluating applications for quality of the project design, worth up to 45 points, reviewers will consider the following factors: the extent to which the services to be provided by the proposed project reflect up-to-date knowledge and an evidence-based project component, the extent to which the training or professional development services to be provided by the proposed project are of sufficient quality, intensity, and duration to build recipient and project capacity in ways that lead to improvements in practices among the recipients of those services, and the extent to which the proposed project represents an exceptional approach to meeting program purposes and requirements and serving the target population. Reviewers will score the quality of the management plan between 0 and 20 points. In determining the quality of the proposed project evaluation, the Secretary considers the following factors: the extent to which the key personnel in the project, when hired, have the qualifications required for the proposed project, including formal training or work experience in fields related to objectives of the project, and represent and or have lived experiences of the target population. The feasibility of the management plan to achieve project objectives and goals on time and within budget, including clearly defined responsibilities, timelines, and milestones for accomplishing project tasks, and the extent to which the time commitments of the project director and principal investigator and other key project personnel are appropriate and adequate to meet the objectives of the proposed project. Slide 30 relates to the adequacy of resources. This section of the narrative should demonstrate how accommodations and resources provided to scholars will be individualized to ensure graduation of highly competent professionals, and how the budget is adequate for meeting the project objectives and mitigating financial burden to scholars in completing the program of study, how scholar support will be distributed to support scholars in completing their degrees. In distributing scholar support, the applicant must consider that scholar support does not need to be uniform for all scholars and should be customized for individual scholars based on scholars' financial needs, including consideration of all costs associated with the cost of attendance. Scholar support can include support for cost of attendance, for example, tuition and fees, university student health insurance, an allowance for books, materials, and supplies, an allowance for miscellaneous personal expenses, an allowance for dependent care, such as childcare, an allowance for transportation, and/or an allowance for room and board, travel in conjunction with training assignments, including conferences, conference registration, and stipends to support scholars' completion of the program and professional development. In designing scholar support, projections for scholar support should consider tuition increases and cost of living increases over the project period, and projects that prepare personnel at the bachelor's degree levels may not provide scholar support during the first 2 years, such as freshman and sophomore years of the degree program, to ensure that scholar support can lead to service obligation fulfillment. Reviewers will score the adequacy of resources between 0 and 10 points. In determining the adequacy of resources and quality of personnel, the Secretary considers the following factors: the adequacy of support for the project, including facilities, equipment, supplies, and other resources from the applicant or the lead applicant organization, and the extent to which the budget is adequate to support the proposed project and the costs are reasonable in relation to the objectives, design, and potential significance of the proposed project. Reviewers will score the quality of the project evaluation and other evidence building between 0 and 15 points, taking into consideration the extent to which the methods of evaluation or other evidence building are thorough, feasible, relevant, and appropriate to the goals, objectives, and outcomes of the proposed project, and the extent to which the methods of evaluation or other evidence building will provide performance feedback and provide formative, diagnostic, or interim data that is a periodic assessment of progress towards achieving intended outcomes. The external reviewers will judge and score the quality of the application using selection criteria. Without the competitive preference points, each application can receive up to a total of 100 points. As I mentioned on the previous slides, the significance of the project can be scored up to 10 points, quality of the project design up to 45 points, quality of the management plan up to 20 points, adequacy of resources up to 10 points, and quality of the project evaluation or other evidence building up to 15 points. Application requirements include Appendix A and Appendix B. The applicant must include in Appendix A charts, tables, figures, graphs, and visuals that provide information directly relating to the application requirements. For example, logic model, person loading chart, project timeline for the narrative, and a letter of support from a public or private partnering agency, school, or program that states it will provide scholars with a field or clinical experience, including mentorship from successful professionals in the field the scholar is pursuing. In Appendix B, include a table that lists the project's required coursework and an assurance that, 1, the project will meet the requirements related to informing all scholarship recipients of their service obligation commitment and dispersing scholarships Failure by a grantee to properly meet these requirements is a violation of the grant award that may result in the grantee being liable for returning any misused funds to ED. Required project assurances include 2. The project will meet the statutory requirements in Section 662E through H of IDA. 3. The project will be operated in a manner consistent with non-discrimination requirements contained in the federal civil rights laws. 4. At least 70% of the total award over the project period will be used for scholar support. 5. Scholar support provided by the project is not conditioned on scholars working for the grantee while enrolled in the program. 6. The project director, key personnel, and scholars will actively participate in learning opportunities such as webinars, briefings supported by OSEP, and intended to promote opportunities for participants to understand reporting requirements, share resources, and generate new knowledge by addressing topics of common interest to participants across projects, including department priorities and needs of the field. 7. The project website, if applicable, will be of high quality with an easy-to-navigate design that meets government or industry-recognized standards for accessibility. 8. Scholar accomplishments, for example, public service, awards, publications, conference presentations, will be reported in annual and final performance reports. And 9, annual data will be submitted on each scholar who receives grant support. Data collection includes the submission of a signed, completed pre-scholarship agreement and exit certification for each scholar funded under an OSEP grant. Applicants are encouraged to visit the Personnel Development Program Data Collection System website at the link provided on the slide for further information about this data collection requirement. Here are a few more general requirements. A successful applicant must make positive efforts to employ and advance in employment of qualified individuals with disabilities, involve individuals with disabilities or parents of individuals with disabilities ages birth through 26 in planning, implementing, and evaluating the project. Applicants for and recipients of funding must, where appropriate, determine whether the project has any potential for replication and adoption by other entities. In this next section, beginning on slide 42, I will cover some general information related to submitting an application. Once again, please refer to the application notice and instructions for additional information. Please note that applications must be submitted electronically in the Grants.gov system. See Grants.gov submission procedures and tips for applicants included in the application instructions. We strongly recommend that you do not wait until the last day to submit your application. Grants.gov will put a date and timestamp on your application and then process it after it is fully uploaded. The time it takes to upload an application will vary depending on a number of factors, including the size of the application and the speed of your internet connection, and the time it takes Grants.gov to process the application will vary as well. If Grants.gov rejects your application, you will need to resubmit successfully to Grants.gov before 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on the deadline date. which is July 2nd of 2026. We strongly encourage applicants to submit all narratives and attachments in PDF read-only format and to ensure narratives and attachments are formatted to ensure accessibility for reviewers. In order to make sure that the application is submitted on time and correctly, please register as early as possible in Grants.gov and start the application process. Do not wait until you have the application ready to register. Grants.gov will create a workspace for applicants to submit the pieces of the application over time. If you're already registered in the system for award management, make sure your registration is current. So submit early, a day or more in advance if possible. Should there be any problems with the Grants.gov system, submitting early will allow you time to correct the problem and resubmit before the deadline. Verify that the submission is okay. Grants.gov will send applicants notification that the submission was on time and validated. So applicants should make sure that they receive that confirmation and not assume the submission was okay. On slide 45, we have some additional advice for submitting an application. Pay attention to the maximum funding levels for the grant as contained in the notice. Awards will not be made for amounts higher than the published amounts. Following the recommended organization, page limits, spacing, and font sizes to facilitate the application review process, and applicants should strongly consider following the recommendations. PDF files make it easier for the system to put together different parts of the application into one application that reviewers can more easily read and follow. The Grants.gov submission procedures and tips for applicants in the application package can be extremely helpful for submitting the application in Grants.gov. Please note that if for any reason an application is submitted more than once and validated more than once, the last application submitted will be considered and previous applications will be considered duplicates and therefore ineligible. There are two additional reasons why an application may not be eligible. First, all applications received after the published deadline will not be eligible for funding. Second, applications that do not address the priority will also not be eligible for funding. For example, an application proposing to provide professional development to childcare staff or training scholars in general education will not be eligible, since that is not the purposes of this priority. Once again, the purpose of this priority is personnel preparation of special education, early intervention, and related services personnel. Thank you for reviewing this webinar. As I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar covered highlights of what's contained in the application package and priority. If you have additional questions, please contact me, preferably by email at sunyoung.on@ed.gov. You can also contact me by phone at 202-987-0141. Additional resources, including the required application abstract template and the recording of this webinar, will be available at the 3 to 5K grant competition webpage listed here. Have a wonderful day.